There are hundreds of punchlines to "Why did the chicken cross the road?" But despite all the humor, the point of that joke is to get to the other side. It's the obvious, the straightforward, the thing you might ignore. And that applies a lot to MIDI controllers. With all the features and capabilities and all the vendors that are out there, it's easy to get distracted from the goal, which is to get MIDI information into your music software. I mean, you could use your digital audio workstation and computer just like a tape deck. You could plug an instrument in it and just record that instrument directly. Skip the whole MIDI thing. But it wouldn't be long before you realize you need drums. The easiest way to get a drum beat into your music is going to be to program MIDI. You typically see MIDI data in your digital audio workstation two ways. This piano roll view, which has a piano on the left and the notes that are being played, are shown as square symbols. The other way is what you see here on the right, is that every note is its own event. So if you click on a note, you get to see the note that's being played, the velocity, and the position of that note and the duration of the note. So MIDI data is really just a bunch of text data with position information, note information, what to play and for how long. Another way you can get MIDI data into your digital audio workstation without a MIDI controller is to just drag MIDI files in. So if you've got a MIDI pack or something like that, you can grab onto the files, drop them into your DAW. You're just going to get basics there. In this case, you're getting a chord progression with whole notes. You could select all the whole notes and change them and modify them with your mouse, as necessary. See, in this MIDI pack, it's got all the chord progressions you're familiar with. And you can change the sound. You could do the same with drum grooves. Find a groove, download some MIDI files, drag them into your DAW, pick a drum instrument, and you're good to go. Change the sound of the kit. And you could modify the MIDI. Loading in a MIDI file is going to give you a head start. You can even load a full MIDI song if you've got the right MIDI files. From that MIDI file, you might cut and paste certain pieces. Maybe you want the drums, maybe you want the piano part, maybe you just want one track. But it can be a good starting point if you have no other way of entering in the MIDI data. But wait a second, this is crazy. The whole point of this video is, why did the chicken cross the road? There's got to be a better way to do it. Yes, it's all about MIDI controller devices. They are the easier way to get MIDI data into your software. They're chock full of features to make that easier. Scale mode, chord mode, arpeggiators, pads, keys, dials, and knobs. They're all there for a reason. The major vendors that make MIDI controllers are these leaders: Novation, M-Audio, Arturia, Native Instruments. You've seen some of these before. There's another category of traditional synth manufacturers that you're familiar with: Roland, Korg, Yamaha. In addition to making synths, they also make MIDI controllers, and in many cases their synths or pianos can be used as a MIDI controller. And there's another category that I call innovators. These are new, smaller companies that have a different take on functionality that the leaders currently don't provide. So these people are pushing the boundaries of what a MIDI controller can do. At the budget level, category 1, your best bet if you're just getting started could be to buy a small, inexpensive 25-key MIDI controller. And the advantage of that is it's very low cost, they're portable, they usually include lots of controls, and they have anywhere from 25 to 32, some of them even have 37 mini keys. The downside is that those mini keys are not easy to play. These aren't designed for a piano player, they're designed for the non-keyboardist that just wants a way to hunt and peck out a particular melody with the keys, but use the pads, dials, and faders in order to get MIDI data into their software. Full keyboards in category 2 come in a lot of ranges from similar vendors that we mentioned before. They come in configurations of 49, 61, and 88 keys, and those keys can range anywhere from simple plastic synth-style keys to fully weighted piano keys, and the price is adjusted accordingly. They usually include pads and some kind of encoders. There's transport controls like play, stop, rewind, so that you can control recording of your parts from the keyboard and you don't have to touch your computer and the computer software. And we call that DAW integration, and there's different levels of DAW integration. The only negative here is that every vendor favors their particular virtual instruments. So if you buy an Arturia keyboard, it's going to work great with Arturia's virtual instruments, but to use it with another vendor's virtual instruments, you're probably going to have to do a little bit of MIDI mapping. The next category are these hybrid keyboards that I mentioned come from innovative small companies that are pushing the boundaries of what a MIDI controller can do. The surface of those controllers might be different, and they typically pick up on some expressive capabilities that are beyond basic MIDI. They're more expressive. They have things like press and tap aftertouch that will control things like pitch, shake, strum, or even pressure glide. Those types of playing are beyond the typical piano playing you might expect. On the flip side, these are expensive, and they include some proprietary software that extends the capability of MIDI. The next category are pad devices, which come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, anywhere from the basic 4x4 16 pad grid up to 64 or more pads. They include potential groovebox capabilities for building a beat, adding a bass line, and adding melodic parts. They also offer DAW integration by delivering MIDI CC messages, which are change control messages. And then at the high end of this, you've got full DAW-less type devices that will replace what your computer would do. And they're at much greater expense, of course. Category 5 is MIDI for guitar. There's a couple different options here, but the most popular is from Roland. It's a MIDI pickup that you can put on any guitar and hook it up to either one of Roland's guitar synths or another MIDI device, perhaps on your computer. Then there are a few manufacturers that build MIDI right into their guitars. Godin and Jamstick are two of them. The pickup will work on any guitar. The guitars with MIDI built in might be a buying option if you don't already own a guitar. The last category are some strange variations. For years, companies have been trying to come up with a new way to control MIDI. Some of them are game-like. Some of them you blow into like a wind instrument. Others you pick and play like a guitar. One of them is ball type device that you can kick around. And just keep in mind that whether it has plastic synth style keys, semi-weighted keys, or fully weighted piano keys, the result is all the same. We're collecting MIDI data and it's being input into the software we're using to control sounds. The controllers themselves have no sounds whatsoever. They're really just a box full of switches, dials, faders, and controls. Now with pad devices, you've got some choices to make. A lot of the keyboards that I mentioned earlier come with a limited number of pads. So you can do things like play drums or execute loops by touching those pads. But pad devices go a step further in that they not only allow you to input MIDI data, but they allow you to control software for looping, edits, chopping up samples, and a different style of composition that keyboard players haven't had access to in the past. One of the dilemmas is whether to get a MIDI controller keyboard that has pads built into it, or one that doesn't have pads and buy a separate pad device. So even though there's a wide variety of MIDI controller devices that you could potentially buy, you need to keep in mind that what you're trying to do is get MIDI information into your digital audio workstation so you can assign those MIDI notes to virtual instruments or drums or other things to round out your music. It's important not to lose sight of the goal. Well friends, I hope you found this video useful. And if you're new to the whole MIDI world and you're debating whether you should buy a MIDI controller, hopefully this gives you the landscape of the options and some reasonable information to make your choices. If you like this video, click on the like button. Consider subscribing to the channel. Leave your comments. I'm always interested in what people have to say. And if you have questions, feel free to ask. Till next time.